Hey, beautiful people. My name's Kristen. Thank you for stopping by my channel to hear about the books that I read in the month of November for 2022, which I predominantly kind of focus on nonfiction November, but I have a smattering of everything, including my classics and my new releases. I am still currently reading Song of Achilles with Jillian at Novel Opinions. I've only read about 5 chapters. She went through a move in November, so I would prefer to read it with her. So that will slide into my December TBR, as well as I pretty much expected S. This is the J.J. Abrams, Doug Dorst book that is really a puzzle. I have read about a third of it. I'm reading it twice, once the regular story and then once the inserts and the notes in the margin. So it is like a story within a story. And what I've discovered, I'm going to give a full review on this when I'm done, but I am super enjoying it. My first report is this is a lot of fun. It does not feel like reading to me, really at all. What it feels like is having a puzzle that is a word puzzle. And so like if you were imagining a 1,000-piece puzzle and it's all words and you're finding words and then you're trying to put them together to make a sentence and you don't know what the book is going to say, and so you're piecing it together, that is exactly what it feels like reading this book. You are like, I find myself like looking at the footnotes and going, oh, I think I remember that might have been a name that was in the footnote earlier, and I look it up, and it's kind of like piecing together a word puzzle and trying to form what the heck is going on. And I really like that. And I just wanted to mention that up front because it's earlier in December, and if you're one of those people that likes to work a puzzle at Christmas time, that actually is very much along that line. And it's not a group activity necessarily where you would be doing it like you would a community puzzle, but if it's okay to do it by yourself, I recommend that experience. I also, during the month of November, read Dragon Reborn. This is the third in the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and I love it. This is the best one yet. This is getting better and better as I go along. So I'm not going to give a lot of spoilers because it is the third in the series, but basically the characters are super well developed. There is an adventure and there is that grand fantasy drama of kind of the evil force, and the characters are trying to discover their own abilities and place and how they are going to overcome and basically kind of save the world in the universe. And I love that trope. I love that story. I read for my classic this month in November, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And it's a short book in page length, but I read this as a buddy read with Aaron of Aaron Facer, and I will leave his channel linked below. And that was a fantastic experience. It's great to read this kind of book with somebody else because even though it's short, it's one of those books that you have to read very slowly and intentionally and parse out the nuance. It is basically a story that starts with a gentleman who's telling the story, and it's shipping business and trade and exploration, and he's revisiting his previous voyage going up in the Congo to gather information on an ivory trade. And there's a mysterious man, Mr. Krantz, who is a character that he's trying to meet up with, but also learn about, and is mysterious. And the river and the back journey is mysterious. And there's a lot of analogy and metaphors and some stuff probably that I didn't even understand even at this point, but I really did enjoy it. I'm not saying it's the best classic ever, but it's not very long, but it's very meaty and interesting. And, you know, I can recommend it, not necessarily as a first classic, but for all the reasons why it has withheld the test of time. I enjoyed the read, and I enjoyed reading it with Eric. Next, I also buddy read H is for Hawk with Gloria Z. Thompson. I will leave her channel below. And I think I enjoyed this a little bit more than she did. This is an account of a woman, Helen MacDonald, who raises her hawk and she finds that it's kind of parallel to going through her grieving process of losing her father. And the story is kind of weighed down a little bit, distracted by some other accounts that MacDonald investigated by another hawk raiser, White, who had similar but different in some ways from her experience. And basically he was messed up. He had a messed up life and didn't even raise his hawk all that well. And why she's so fascinated with him and how exactly she feels like he ties into her, I still am unclear. And I did not enjoy those parts of the book. When it would get to that, I would kind of muddle through and I'd keep on waiting for how it was so important to give that much of the story away, so to speak. And I think that's been a lot of people's experiences with this book. But having said that, overall, there was parts that I really, really enjoyed, particularly the parts where she talked about her father and dealing with the stories of her memories of him and putting that to rest. I thought that the information about what it involved training a hawk was interesting, but I thought this was going to be a 5-star for me, and really it's a 3 and not even that solid of a 3, which is a little disappointing, but now I know. My new release for the month, I read Matthew Quick's We Are the Light, and this book has a really interesting kind of foundation that he believes that his wife, who has passed away, is still around in ghost form and not released, but helping him process things. And he's still going to a therapy session, but he's really still unable to let go of his old therapist and kind of keeps writing him letters. So he keeps writing the old therapist, kind of dealing with his grief and loss. And then he has a former student, young man, mentee, that starts basically camping out literally in his backyard. So it's this crazy story that I thought would be really interesting. And in some ways it really is. But again, kind of like H is for Hawk, in the end, I was kind of still not really buying into all the ending ways, wrap-ups. It had a lot of interest and a lot of potential, but it didn't just quite get there for me personally. But if that sounds interesting to you, maybe check out some other reviews and look into it. Then we get into a little string of nonfiction for Nonfiction November, and that was really good. The ones that I picked or you picked for me to read were really, really good. I read An American Life by Ronald Reagan. This is the last nonfiction on my goals for the year that I had picked. This is his personal account, starting from a young man getting interested in politics, what it was like growing up, how he kind of started in the movie industry, right? Which honestly, I don't know that I've actually watched a whole movie with Ronald Reagan in it, but it was interesting because the political side of making a movie, like the rights of actors and all those kind of things, that's how he really first got interested into politics and into kind of not human rights, but the way things operate most efficiently, and thinking about the economy and some of the big systems of how things are run, and then goes into becoming governor of California and going on to the run and the office of president. And he is such a good storyteller. And I know the first 3 chapters of this are audio narrated by him, so I'd kind of like to go back and get those just to hear his own voice speaking about it. But he just has humor, and then has very serious topics and things that he talks about where you can just feel his heart and his passion and his angst over the situations. I learned so much. I knew a lot about the Cold War with Russia and a lot about what was going on as we started the Middle East, I even got some insight and kind of preview into the George Bush presidency. I was particularly kind of wishing I had read the Jimmy Carter diary before this one, because he does refer and talk a lot, especially at the beginning, about Carter. And it was a great kind of whet my appetite, really interested to read about Jimmy Carter. So that one will at least be read next November, because I like reading them around the election times, if not sooner, just because I'm really intrigued now. So this was absolutely a 5-star. If you're into American president memoirs, that one was great. I also read my husband's anniversary present to me, Tim Tebow, Mission Possible. This is not really a memoir, although he is sharing a lot of actual stories that happened to him. But this is set up so that it encourages you to think about what is your call in life, what is your purpose and meaning, and how do you put that into place. And it's coming from a faith perspective of understanding God's purpose for you. And the most wonderful part for me reading this was there was an entire chapter that, as an example, documented the Salazar's account in Guatemala, being led to creating their ministry called Guatemala Down, which is really the only organization in the entire country that focuses exclusively on those with Down syndrome. And Tim Tebow got connected through the ministry that somebody went on that trip, saw the need, went back and contacted Tim Tebow's foundation, and then he started Night to Shine in Guatemala. And so he found out about them, their story, and now he's included an entire chapter on their story and their ministry. And it's really good. It's really impressive. And so this whole book kind of has those kind of examples and encouragement, and just helping you try to think about what it is that is your kind of mission that's not impossible, but possible. Then for nonfiction, I read The Wild Vine. This is by Todd Kliman, and it is a chronicle of the history of the Norton grape. And what's funny is I lived in Virginia for 19 years, and the wineries around there had bottles with Norton, and it was one of my very favorite. It is like a heavier bodied red that's I call it very jammy. And I really, really love it. It's kind of a bold, earthy red. And I purposely would stock up on this. And I never knew that it was native to Virginia, or the 200-year struggle of creating a native vine to America that, was a great wine. All these things, it traveled over to Missouri, y'all. Who would have thought it? There are so many little tidbits, and going into California wine, going into actual vineyards, and going into actual people that, not necessarily that I knew them directly, but I absolutely know exactly, driven by, visited, spent time at these vineyards. They're very real, very there, very happening. And then to have the backstory and all of this, I think enhances any wine lover's experience. But particularly, it was fun for me revisiting places that I've actually been and drank the wine. And actually, it makes you want to go. The disclaimer is it makes you want to go out and buy that wine or order it, and it can be a little pricey. So there's my disclaimer. You might end up buying some wine. And then finally, I read The Long Run. And this is a memoir of a girl who loses her parents in a plane accident, and she's going to run across the country basically to kind of get over her grief. But the interesting thing is it didn't happen immediately. Like, she had spent 10 years before she did this. And so I just struggled a little bit, like, how can you give up 10 years of your life not moving on or figuring this out sooner? I just really hurt for her. And she did a really good job of documenting women running and the history of women runners or lack of women runners at the beginning, and like who kind of the breakthrough people were, which I wasn't expecting it to be that kind of nonfiction book, but that was interesting. I knew a lot of it, but a lot of it was new information to me. But overall, I was less drawn into her personal story. Like I thought she did a better job talking about the history of running and the other women than she did necessarily conveying her own. And I got the feeling maybe that she's still kind of stuck and not really having closure and not really definitive about what she's learned or moving on or any of those kind of things. So I ended up, this is probably more like, you know, a 2-star book for me, which was a little sad because I love writing books and I love memoirs. And so I had high expectations, and maybe my expectations were just a little high for that one. But those are the books. I read 8 books in November and started a couple others. But a couple of them were kind of chunker books. So I feel okay about that. I felt a little slumpy this month, but overall, I feel like I still did all right. So we're going to press on to December. Stay tuned. I think within a couple days, I'm going to be posting my TBR, and you can let me know if you read any of those or what you think of those, and encourage me. I encourage you, pick up a book, keep reading, and happy reading. Take care, y'all.